Welcome to Connecting the Dots, a non-traditional legal program with your host and trusted advisor, Liz Myska, your guide through the web of life's dilemmas.
Welcome to another edition of Connecting the Dots. I'm your host, Liz Myska. And today I have the pleasure of having one of my friends and one of my volunteers join us. Welcome, Jen.
Thank you, Liz.
So introduce yourself and maybe a little bit of how you and I met, and then we will launch into your project, your pen name, your authorship.
Sure. I am an author of both young adult and adult books. I've written 12 at this point. The majority of those are young adult books, also some nonfiction as well. And we met when I started to volunteer with the Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired, and I went through the training to learn how to be a guide, and then we started going grocery shopping together. I learned how to have an entirely new kind of grocery shopping experience with you. And then some of the events that you've been in charge of organizing, helping with some of those.
Yes, and you are a stellar sighted guide, and you are great at descriptions, so I'm imagining that theme carries through in your books.
It's fun to look at things and have to actually, to your point, working with you and taking you and your team on through events and things is very much trying to put yourself in your shoes and see, what aren't you getting, what are you getting. It is really kind of similar to writing because you have to sort of build a picture for people who aren't there to sort of see what's in my mind.
So what made you start writing?
I had a dream, and I woke up and I thought that would be an awesome book, and I just started writing. And in college, after college, I went to a publishing program at Radcliffe because I was always fascinated by books and the publishing process. So I knew how it worked, and so I was really fortunate in that once I started writing, and I thought I really had something, I also started looking at how to get published, and I knew how to pursue agents and get representation by an agent. And so I kind of worked in tandem, writing the book, pursuing representation, got an agent, and then the whole process started. So it was completely by accident.
Wow. So do you mind me asking what the dream was, and did the dream manifest itself in the...
It did. It's one of these books. I had a dream. This was way before reality TV was really a big thing. It was just when the first Bachelor came out, and I had a dream that I was on a reality show, and I was a contestant on a show like The Bachelor, but I was married. And I was freaking out, how can I do this? I'm married. I can't be trying to, get a husband. And I woke up, and I was like, that's a really neat idea. And what if I was a journalist, and I was assigned to infiltrate a show and see what the process was like and meet the women and the men who pursued finding a partner on reality TV. And so that was kind of the book, and that's what I pitched to my agent, and that was my first novel that was published.
Wow. And is that one of the ones that you brought today?
It is. It's this one.
And what's the title?
Bachelorette #1.
Okay.
Yeah. And that was really fun. So that came very easily. I just would wake up in the middle of the night with ideas and start writing. So that one just flew. I literally wrote that in maybe 4 months, which is, second one is not that easy.
Right.
I sort of thought it would happen as simply, but I actually had one idea, and when I pitched it to my agent and my publisher, they really liked one of the characters the most, and they sort of said the whole book should be about her, and that's how my second book came along.
Wow. Are you just to get back to the process, are you crestfallen when your idea doesn't have resonance with your publisher or your agent?
That hasn't happened,
okay.
Fortunately.
Okay, all right.
Knock on wood. And it's always it was a very collaborative effort. Actually, one of my YA books, my second one, they wanted me to write a sequel to, and I just didn't have it in me. I didn't know what happened to a story that I concluded, and it took years and years, and eventually I did end up writing a sequel, but it took me a long time to figure out these characters that I basically put to bed. The story was over. How could their story continue and still make sense?
Wow. Did you age?
No,
did you age them?
I aged. They didn't age. No, it actually picks up basically a month after that book ended, and it takes them through the summer. And it just happens that's one of the books that actually goes to Martha's Vineyard for the summer.
Okay, and I was going to ask you about that too. We're recording this June 1st, and the summer is upon us, and a lot of your books, I understand, your young adult books take place in Martha's Vineyard, and I'm curious why that is.
I started going to Martha's Vineyard over 2 decades ago and just loved it. And I've always gone back every summer. My kids have been there since, their first summers and always have great memories. And I thought it was really interesting to look at a place that has a population balloon in the summer with sort of these interlopers that come in and sort of use up your island, right, for all the great things it has to offer, and then leave. And so in my books, my Island Summer series, it's about teenagers who actually live there full time and what happens when these people come in the summer, and kind of gets to play with that interplay of sort of summer vacationers and locals and how they interact and relationships that begin, and then at the end of the summer, what happens to those relationships.
So when you first started writing, your kids, you have a son and a daughter, they weren't teenagers.
No.
So where were you getting the inspiration to write about teenagers?
We're all teenagers inside, right?
Okay, all right.
I still think inside sometimes there's a lot of teenager there. My kids were, I think, 4 and 6 when I wrote my first book. My first books were all adult. I wrote 4 adult books, and then transitioned to YA. And so at that point, my daughter was basically old enough she could have started reading them, but she's never read, has no desire to read anything
Really?
I've ever written. I don't think she wants to know what goes on up there, right? She doesn't want to know.
Did you pattern any attributes of your characters to people that you knew?
It's like picking and choosing. Like
Right.
when you have really vivid memories about something that's stuck with you for maybe some really odd reason that nobody would even recall. Things like that I tend to pepper in. My friends, I tend to pepper in funny things they say or things they've done or characteristics. But I would say basically 75% of it is completely just imagination.
Really? And since I haven't read any, I apologize. Is there dialogue? Is there romance? I mean, what do you think appeals and to a young adult audience? Who is your audience?
Mm-hmm.
Is it mostly female? Is it male? It doesn't matter?
Definitely female, definitely girls, definitely I would say an age. It can get into some mature themes, so I would say definitely from maybe like 7th grade, 8th grade and older, because they are high school students. They're all either beginning their senior year or in their senior year. So it's just really about, there's maybe some romance, and there is romance, but it's also just about all the changes you're going through at that point in your life, when you're kind of leaving one life behind and looking forward to the next stage, college, and what is that going to bring? Right. And it's sort of this feeling of knowing where you are but not knowing where you're going to be, and how that changes your personal relationships with your best friends, with your parents. A lot of times, all the books, there's something going on in the parent relationship as well. So you've got all these sort of interplays that really impact the main character, and they kind of start in one place and end in another.
Wow. And when you start writing, do you know where you're going?
I always know the end before I know the beginning, and I never know the middle. I mean, the ending, I have a book right now I have an idea for. I know everything about how it ends. I have no idea how it begins. I know nothing about the middle. They call it the middle is always the hardest. It really is the hardest, because you need to make things happen. But
to get to that outcome.
And it's kind of like it can take any sort of path, right? But it's fun when suddenly you write something or something comes to you that you didn't know was going to be there before, and suddenly you know what happens, and that's so much fun. There are things, like I said, I don't know typically when I start how I'm going to get to the end, but there are things that happen that I'm just like, that is awesome, and you're so excited that you figured something out or something new happened. So it's a lot of fun.
So where do you draw your inspiration? I mean, is it just observing daily life? Is it observing people's relationships? Is it, reading yourself, reading other people, reading literature, watching television? Where do you think this comes from, other than your dream?
Yeah, that was a one-off. I wish it was that easy. It comes from everywhere. Like when I knew I wanted to write a series that took place at Martha's Vineyard, I started thinking about, what does it mean to live there? What does it mean to visit there? And doing a lot of research. And I think that's, to me, so important, because when I'm reading a book, and I just love to read, if there's something that happens that I'm like, you know what, that wouldn't happen, or somebody writes about a place and it's an actual place, and yet what they're talking about is wrong, like a street goes the wrong way, or just things that are wrong, it breaks the spell. Right. So I try to be as diligent a researcher as possible. So I spend a lot of time in the vineyard, talking to people, where my characters work in the summertime, Some of them are real places, some of them aren't.
Okay.
The ones that are real, I actually went and stayed there. There's an inn there that's a real place, and I actually went and stayed there. And she worked there, cleaning rooms and doing things like that. But I went and ate breakfast there, and I talked to the owner. I wrote a book about a woman who owns a cake bakery. And she makes phenomenal wedding cakes for on Newbury Street in Boston. And I actually went and spent time in a bakery with a woman who makes French pastry and learned everything about from the mat on the floor so your feet don't get fatigued to the tools you're using. So just trying to make it as realistic as possible so the spell is never broken by things that just don't click with the reader.
Now I'm going to throw in when you said
Yes.
pepper. That a couple years ago you went to Italy and learned how to make gelato. So is that, did one of your characters do that? Is that like the bakery thing?
I thought that coming out of that, so I did. I went to Parmigiani Gelato University in Bologna and learned how to become a gelatier. I thought that a book would come out of that. Like I thought, oh my God, this would be so cool. And I just haven't figured out what that means yet. Like, I don't know. I thought it'd be cool if you could do like a nonfiction, like this is what happens when you go to a foreign country and pop yourself an apartment for several weeks and go to school with people from all around the world. But there was never sort of any hook there. Like, it was really cool for me personally, but is it something that somebody else would want to read about?
Really? Well, couldn't you? Now I'm giving you an idea. Have the
I am open to all ideas.
Have the gelatier be on the Martha's Vineyard.
I just don't know how. Okay, so a gelatier is interesting, but like, what else happens? And that's like with the baker. Like, there's all sorts of things. She actually believes that she has the skill to foretell whether or not relationships are going to work or not by watching two people pick out their wedding cake. And so she ends up really believing she has this sixth sense around it. And ends up then impacting other people's relationships and her own, and it kind of sends things awry. So there has to be kind of like a bigger, story to tell. Like just it's really cool to make gelato, which it is very cool to make gelato.
Yes, and eat gelato,
And most of the time, if you're making it, you're also eating it.
There you go. And maybe it's the different flavors that the different flavors of your books too that. That's what makes you so curious about, like, what is it like to be in this place, doing this thing, interacting with people for a summer. Maybe that's, so it's time sensitive, but it's also endeavor sensitive. I don't know.
It's fraught with sort of like newness. And people that like are literally using it for everything, like they go there and they're just the beaches and the food and they're using it. And then the people that are there every day who live with it. And I think those are two entirely different perspectives.
Right. And they don't. Well, I think it's apropos because people may be surrounded by lush beauty, but they live in it and they don't see it. So they search for it someplace else, and
people who come in from the outside and just use it up. I mean, you think about it environmentally, right? They're coming there, they're using all the natural resources of this island that the people who live there need to rely on the other 9 months of the year, right? So it's sort of really interesting. But something that was really cool on Martha's Vineyard, I actually compiled and edited a book of essays by women authors about Judy Blume. And Judy Blume happens to have a house on the vineyard. And I was invited to speak at the Martha's Vineyard Book Festival one summer when the book came out. And there were people in the audience and stuff, and so I was talking about, this is it. It's called Everything I Needed to Know About Being a Girl I Learned from Judy Blume. And it's got like 24 authors and myself who all wrote essays about what it meant to us growing up reading Judy Blume.
I'm not familiar with Judy Blume, so please
inform
me.
There's actually a movie right now being made out of one of her books called Tiger Eyes. But she was like quintessential young adult author, written just tons of books, like Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, and starring Sally J. Friedman as herself. Books that really informed a whole generation of women by reading these. And so I was talking about the essays, and this woman in a baseball cap raises her hand, and she asks a question. And she's got sunglasses on. And then she like stands up and like takes off her cap and it was Judy Blume. And I was like, so it was like the most surreal moment and then I was like, oh my God, did I say anything bad? Like, oh my God, I gotta like rejigger. But so she had known about the book because my publisher contacted her to tell her that the book was gonna be published and stuff. So she knew about it. And so then after that, we obviously met, and she invited myself and my kids to go to her home on the vineyard, and we spent the day with her. And it was just so cool to read or to meet somebody whose books really informed how you thought about life as a kid.
Right,
Like everything from
right.
your friendships to your interpersonal relationships, adults, how you viewed adults. So that was like really one of the coolest things to even come out of just writing, was meeting somebody that I personally felt really impacted by as a reader.
Did she, because oftentimes because I was a voracious reader as well when I was younger and sighted. But oftentimes the image that you have in your mind about the author or about the characters, when it's transformed into a movie, you're disappointed because it's not the same. So I'm wondering, when you met Judy Blume in person, were you trying to match what you thought she was like with what she was like, or was that not?
I didn't really have an expectation.
Okay.
She was so, I don't even know the word, kick-ass. I mean, she was just, she's, at this point, she had to be in her 60s.
Okay.
Maybe even her 70s. I don't remember. But she just had an energy and opinions and a voice. And she actually happened to be really good friends with literally my favorite young adult author when I was growing up. And this woman subsequently passed away prior to this, but so I got to talk to her about this woman, Norma Klein, who I absolutely just devoured. And I went on to Amazon, I bought all of her old books, and they're all like falling apart, just to like have them in my possession so that I can share them. Not my daughter, because she has no interest, but it's like my grandkids to say, this is what I read growing up, and this is what really impacted me. So it's just cool to like meet this woman who's written such a diversity of a catalog of books, and match it with this woman who's kind of like very normal, but really just a spitfire, just an absolute spitfire. And her books are so sort of like, they're not salacious, they're just kind of her kids are just normal kids, and yet she was just on fire. So that was really cool.
Now, when you described that, it reminded me a couple of months ago on public television, I watched a documentary on Twyla Thorpe, who I knew was a modern dancer, but I had no idea her talent. And when you were describing Judy Blume, it just made me think of, wow, Twyla Thorpe, what a powerhouse. But now she's in her 80s, and again, this was a documentary, so there were visuals, and her body doesn't work like it did, when she was young and agile, and after I saw the documentary, I was just, I wanted to talk about it because I knew her name, but I didn't know her fame, and I didn't know, again, the impact that she had on dance in general. And I liken that to what you're saying with Judy Blume and this other author, the imprint that it had on you personally that resulted in you, somehow internalizing that and then having that come out.
Absolutely, and I think it was, it's just one woman. So you watch this documentary about one woman who really changed the face of dance, right?
Yes.
Completely.
Yes.
And I think that it's so interesting because when she was doing it, she probably didn't think that, right? Just like when Judy Blume was writing books, she wasn't thinking, oh, I'm going to impact generations of women to come.
Right.
When I actually contacted these other women authors I know, and I said, would you want to contribute? They all had a story. Oh, I loved this book she wrote, and this book she wrote, and all the essays everybody took a different tact, but like mine was about, how I saw myself in her characters, not 100%,
right,
but little snippets and these little like flashes of memory I have that I like connect to when I was in that moment saying, oh, this is just like I read about, and this is just like I read about. And even now when I get emails from readers and they're just like, oh, I loved your book, and I totally saw myself in this person or that person. It's like cool, because again, it's all just coming out of our heads.
Right.
We were in, I got emails from a couple of girls in Ireland who read my books, especially the Martha's Vineyard series, and they came over and they wanted to work on Martha's Vineyard after reading my book. Now, they didn't get to the vineyard, but they did come over and they literally worked on Cape Cod. Her and her sister came over, got a job on Cape Cod because they loved the book so much that they were like, I need to live there. And then years later, we were in Ireland, and we actually went and they were college students at this point.
That's cool.
And we actually went out for drinks with them and got to like chat with them. And it was just so cool to see these young girls that read the books when they were like growing up and what it spurred them to do. And then later on meeting them when they're sort of, young adults, grown-ups, and just hanging out with them. And it was just so cool.
And I understand that completely. When you go to a place and you have a memory of it even though you've never been there before, and it just sparks start to ignite in your head. It's amazing. It truly is amazing. So what are you working on? What are you working on now, if you can reveal?
So I have an idea. Again, I know how it ends. I know the entire last chapter. I just don't know how it gets there, and it's a little different. It's a little darker. It's actually very dark, which I don't usually write dark things.
Okay.
I'm not afraid to tackle difficult subjects, but in terms of being really dark, I haven't done that. So I've tinkered with that. I don't know if that's going to go anywhere. COVID has, totally the last year changed things, and I also run a business, so I was really busy the past year, so didn't have as much time to write. So I don't know, I'll see where it takes me.
When you write, do you have like a little corner? Do you have a certain time of day? Do you, have certain things surrounding you that would, hopefully get the flow going?
I can't write at home.
You can't write at home?
Too many things like laundry and dishes and cats that, require my attention. So I usually go to a bookstore and write, or a cafe and write.
Okay.
So I do like going. Actually, I wrote a book with a best friend of mine, a nonfiction book, and we actually went to Martha's Vineyard for a weekend and hunkered down there and wrote the entire book.
Really?
In a weekend, yeah. It was nonfiction, so it was a little different. But so I like getting somewhere where I'm not distracted by normal, daily life.
And when you start writing, do you just perpetuate the process? In other words, you start at 4:00 in the morning and you just go. No. Okay.
No, I wish it was that simple.
Okay. All right.
No, it happens in spurts again, because I do run a business, so I don't have 8 hours a day to sit down. So weekends, mostly mornings are best. Even though I'm not a morning person, I'm definitely more creative in the morning, because by the end of the day, you want to be done with it.
Right.
So no, there's actually no rhyme or reason. And, writing big whiteboards with every chapter and just, here's what happens, because I also don't write sequentially. So
Okay.
I have to always remember, if this happened in chapter 4, where does that come around to in chapter 14? This is, making sure that everything aligns.
Does it have to be, do you have to produce a certain number of chapters? What are the requirements with regard to the publishing, but also your own requirements of well, now it's done because, it's a thin book as opposed to a fat book. Do you impose any of that?
So a regular adult, or, a regular paperback or hardcover is over 60,000 words. Typically less than 120. That's kind of a big book. But it never ends up being too short. It's always too much. And it's you end up tossing stuff out and culling things down. And sometimes you just write an entire chapter and you're like, that is just not cool. And you just start over again, So.
But do you keep it for
Yes.
Okay.
Never throw anything out.
I was going to say.
Never throw anything out. No.
I like to write, but I'm not an author. But it's kind of like, I like the way those words are strung together, or I like that concept. And
I've got notebooks where I'm just I'm writing things down,
right?
Or even audio messages on my phone, here's an idea, that sort of thing. Yeah, collect everything. You might not use it, but you never know where it'll go in the future.
So we talked a little bit about writer's block too. That at least that middle. Have you ever been in the, it won't come, it just...
Yeah, I had my third adult book was really difficult.
Okay.
Really difficult. I just don't know why, but it was hard. And literally there were entire places it was going that I just ditched. And then other ones are I have to say that all the YA books, the young adult books, have been easier. My sequel was really hard, but once I got going, it started to make more sense. And then I knew what story I wanted to tell. But yeah, when you're stuck, it's not fun. But basically, there's also a lot of exercises you can do. I've bought books that are 101 writing exercises. And one of them actually ended up being in the first chapter of a book I wrote. And it was literally a writing exercise saying, talk about the thing on the planes in the back of the catalogs, the sky catalogs where you buy things out of.
Oh yeah.
And it literally ended up in one of my books. So ideas can come from the most random places.
And you're reminding me again, you're bringing me back to my past. When I was in high school, there was a book, it was just pictures, and it was called Stop, Look, and Write. So you would look at the picture, and I remember it vividly. There was a picture of an old man in the park, in the summer because the leaves were out, and just by looking at the picture, be like, oh, okay, I can concoct a story about this. So thank you for bringing me back to that. It was a picture book, but not the typical picture book. So. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time, but I want you to be able to tell people where to find your books and where to find you.
I write under the name Jenny O'Connell, and jennyo'connell.com is where blurbs of all my books are, and there's links there to go to Amazon or whoever to purchase them.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate your time.
No, thanks, Jen, for coming
My pleasure.
and kicking off my summer.
That was a good one.
Join me next time for another edition of Connecting the Dots.
Please note that the information provided in this show is not a substitute for consulting with an experienced local attorney and receiving counsel based on the facts and circumstances of a particular transaction. To contact Lizbeth, email her at lisbeth@elizabethlmyska.com or call her office at 508-753-7681. We're online at connectingthedots.lawyer. Executive producers, Liz Myska and Jack Peacock. Producers, John Medberry and Bill Hamilton. A production of Elizabeth L. Myska, JD, LLM, in association with Compliments.